On a Wednesday morning in October 2023, a man sat on the cold stone steps of a building on Michigan Avenue in Chicago and asked a woman in a red coat if she could spare some change. She looked at him the way certain people look at things they consider beneath them, not with anger, not even with contempt exactly, but with the specific blankness of someone who has decided that what they are looking at does not qualify as a full human encounter. She reached into her designer bag without slowing her pace, produced a single dollar bill, and dropped it from a height just sufficient to make the dropping deliberate. The bill caught the October wind and skittered across the sidewalk away from the man's outstretched hand. She did not stop to watch where it landed. She was already through the revolving door of the building behind him, her red coat disappearing into the lobby, her heels clicking across the marble floor toward the elevator bank. She had a 9 o'clock meeting. She had places to be. She had a career that was, by every visible measure, ascending rapidly towards something very significant. She had absolutely no idea that the man on the steps behind her was the reason that career was about to end before lunch. His name was Nathan Cole. He was 51 years old. He was sitting on those steps in a worn canvas jacket, a knit cap, scuffed boots, and 3 days of intentional stubble because he had chosen to be there. He had chosen every detail of his appearance with the same precision he brought to every decision he had made in 30 years of building one of the most quietly powerful investment firms in the American Midwest. He had chosen the location, Mercer & Lane's headquarters at 420 North Michigan Avenue, because Mercer & Lane was the company he was preparing to acquire in the largest deal of his career, and Nathan Cole had a rule he had followed without exception for 3 decades. Before he bought anything, he looked at it from the outside. Not from a boardroom. Not from a due diligence report. From the outside, the way the world that could not afford to be inside it saw it every day. He had been sitting on those steps for 4 days. He had watched 47 Mercer & Lane employees enter and exit that building. He had noted which ones held the door. Which ones made eye contact. Which ones dropped coins with care and which ones dropped them with theater and which ones walked past without any acknowledgement at all. He had a small notebook in the inside pocket of his canvas jacket and he had been writing in it every morning. The notebook was not a prop. Nathan Cole had made $4 billion by paying attention to things that other people decided were not worth their time. The notebook was simply the latest version of a habit that had started when he was 22 and broke in watching the world from the outside for reasons that were not chosen. Victoria Chase had made it into his notebook on day 1. Not because she dropped the dollar from a height, though he had noted that too, but because of what she said into her phone as she passed him. She was mid-conversation, her voice carrying the crisp self-assurance of someone who expects rooms to accommodate her volume. She said, to whoever was on the other end of the call, without lowering her voice or breaking her stride, "There's another one on the steps today. You'd think they'd clear these people out before business hours. It's not a great look for the building." She pushed through the revolving door. The call continued on the other side of the glass, muffled and disappearing. Nathan wrote 3 words in his notebook. Then he turned the page and kept watching. He had built Cole Meridian Group from nothing. That was not a figure of speech. Nathan Cole had grown up in Rockford, Illinois, the son of a plumber and a school cafeteria worker, the first person in his family to attend college, the first person in his extended family to own a business, and for a period of 14 months between the ages of 23 and 24, after his first venture failed. After the investors he had trusted with other people's money made decisions that left him legally clear but financially destroyed, Nathan Cole had lived in his car in a parking garage in Waukegan and worked 3 jobs simultaneously while rebuilding from a position that most people in his situation never rebuilt from. He knew what it felt like to be on the outside of a building like 420 North Michigan Avenue looking Indiana. He knew it not as an intellectual exercise but as a physical memory he carried in his body. The canvas jacket and the knit cap were costume. The memory was real. He had never told that story publicly. He had never given an interview that went beyond the company's investment strategy and market positioning. He had no social media presence. His name appeared in financial trade publications occasionally but almost never with a photograph. The employees of Mercer and Lane, which Cole Meridian was preparing to absorb through a transaction that would close in approximately 60 days, knew that a major acquisition was in process. They did not know by whom. The deal had been structured behind holding companies and intermediary entities with the specific intention of maintaining Nathan's anonymity until the moment he chose to step forward. He had done this before. It was always intentional. It was always for the same reason. Nathan Cole believed that the moment people knew who he was, they stopped being who they were. And he needed to know who they were. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you are watching from right now. We would love to hear from you. And if you are not subscribed yet, hit that button right now, because what happens to Victoria Chase in the second half of this story is the part that people never see coming, even when they can feel it approaching.
This is where we
Victoria
stop
Chase had
and
joined
start
Mercer
owning.
and Lane 4 years earlier as a senior marketing manager and had risen to vice president of brand and communications in 31 months, a pace that the company's internal records showed was faster than any previous promotion in the division's history. She was good at her job. That was real, and it was not nothing. She understood brand positioning with an instinct that her colleagues respected even when they did not particularly like her. She could read a room, read a market, read a demographic with the accuracy of someone who had spent years studying what made people respond and what made them disengage. She was disciplined, prepared, and consistently delivered results that her boss James Whitfield had come to rely on with a confidence he had not extended to many people in his career. She was also the kind of person who had never been required to examine the gap between her professional competence and her personal character, because the professional competence had always moved fast enough to stay ahead of the gap. She had grown up in Naperville, Illinois, in a family that was comfortable without being wealthy, that valued achievement and appearance in approximately equal measure, and that had rewarded Victoria's ambition from the time she was old enough to understand that ambition was rewarded. She had learned early that certain things opened doors: the right clothes, the right posture, the right confidence, the right school, the right address, and she had pursued all of those things with the focused efficiency of someone who understood the game and intended to win it. She was not cruel in any simple or obvious way. She did not bully people directly. She simply had a fully developed hierarchy of who mattered and who did not, and she operated within that hierarchy with a consistency that the people above her never saw, because she was always warm and charming and capable in their presence, and the people below her saw constantly but had limited ability to address. Sandra Price had worked as Victoria's assistant for 2 years and had developed a comprehensive internal catalog of Victoria's behaviors that she shared with nobody, because Sandra Price was smart enough to know that the right moment for information is rarely the moment you first acquire it. Sandra had watched Victoria dismiss delivery drivers, ignore maintenance staff, speak over receptionists, and conduct the specific small theater of condescension that people with Victoria's particular variety of self-regard perform so automatically they no longer notice they are performing it. Sandra noted all of it. She kept it in the same internal catalog where she kept everything else she had observed in 12 years of working in corporate environments. She was waiting, as she had always waited, for the moment when the catalog would become relevant. That moment arrived on a Thursday morning in the third week of October 2023, when James Whitfield called a company-wide all-hands meeting and introduced, via video link from New York, a representative of the acquiring entity who explained that the transaction, which had been in process for several months, was now moving into its final stage, and that the new majority owner of Mercer and Lane would be making a visit to the Chicago headquarters the following Monday. The representative did not say the owner's name. He said that the owner preferred to introduce himself in person. The meeting lasted 22 minutes. When it ended, every senior employee at Mercer and Lane spent the rest of that Thursday attempting to determine through their networks who the acquiring party was. Victoria Chase spent 4 hours on it and came up with 3 candidate names, none of which were correct, and went home that evening no closer to the answer than she had been at 9 that morning. Nathan Cole arrived at 420 North Michigan Avenue on Monday morning at 8:45. He was wearing a charcoal wool suit that had been made for him by a tailor in New York whose waiting list was 18 months long. His hair was neatly cut. His shoes were the shoes of a man who had learned very early that certain people read shoes before they read faces. He looked, in every visible dimension, like exactly what he was, a man of significant resources and absolute self-possession who had never needed a room to validate him and had therefore never performed for one. He walked through the revolving door of the building without looking at the steps. He knew the steps were empty. He had confirmed that the city's outreach workers had moved the regular population along the previous week, which he had not requested and would not have requested, but which had happened as it often happened around buildings preparing for significant visitors. He noted the emptiness of the steps the way he noted everything, quietly, completely, and without comment. James Whitfield met him in the lobby with the specific energy of a man who has been waiting 45 minutes longer than he planned to wait and is performing calm over the top of it. They shook hands. Whitfield introduced his senior leadership team who had assembled in the lobby in a configuration that communicated hierarchy without being asked to. Nathan shook each hand. He made eye contact with each person for exactly long enough to communicate genuine attention. He remembered each name. When he reached Victoria Chase, standing third from the left in her most carefully chosen blazer, he shook her hand and said her name back to her and held eye contact for the same duration he had held it with everyone else. His expression gave her nothing. She gave him her most polished professional smile and said it was a pleasure to meet him and that she had been looking forward to this. He said he had been looking forward to it as well. Both statements were true in completely different ways. The Monday meeting lasted 3 hours. Nathan sat at the head of the conference table and asked questions that the room quickly understood were not the questions of someone performing due diligence, they were the questions of someone who had already done the diligence and was now assessing something else entirely. He asked about culture. He asked about how decisions were made when leadership was not in the room. He asked what the company was proud of and what it was not proud of, and he asked the second question with the same tone as the first, which made it impossible to deflect. Victoria answered several questions during the meeting with the crisp competence she always brought to rooms where she needed to perform well. Her answers were good. Nathan nodded and wrote something in his notebook, the same small notebook, Sandra noticed from across the table, that she had seen in the hand of the man on the steps outside the building the previous week. Sandra said nothing. She added the observation to her catalogue and waited. The dinner that evening was at a restaurant in the West Loop that Whitfield had chosen for its combination of privacy and prestige. 8 people attended, Nathan, Whitfield, and the 6 most senior members of the Mercer and Lane leadership team including Victoria. The dinner was ostensibly social, but Nathan Cole did not attend social events that were not also professional assessments, and everyone at the table understood this even if they could not have articulated it precisely. The conversation moved through the company's history, its market position, its future direction. Nathan asked each person at the table one question that was specifically theirs, a question that demonstrated he had learned something about each of them before walking in the door. When he reached Victoria, he asked her about a brand repositioning campaign she had led 18 months earlier that had significantly increased the company's visibility in the Midwest market. She answered well. She was at her best in these moments, prepared, articulate, genuinely knowledgeable about her own work. Nathan listened. He asked a follow-up. She answered the follow-up. He nodded and turned to the person on his left. What happened next happened because of alcohol and the specific loosening of judgment that comes when a person has been performing at high intensity for an entire day and believes that the performance is going well enough that they can afford to relax into themselves slightly. Victoria had had 2 glasses of wine over dinner. Not enough to impair her. Enough to lower the gap between her curated professional self and her actual self by a few degrees. The group had moved from dinner to drinks at the restaurant bar, a smaller, more informal gathering of 4 people including Victoria and Nathan, while the others had said their goodbyes. The conversation had become easier and less structured. Nathan had been warm and funny in a way that surprised people who had spent the day being slightly afraid of him. Victoria was charming and relaxed and feeling, for the first time all day, like she was connecting with him as a person rather than performing for him as an executive. And then a man came through the door of the restaurant. He was wearing worn clothing and moving with the slightly unsteady navigation of someone who was cold and tired and had been outside for a long time. He approached the bar and asked the bartender quietly if he could have a glass of water. The bartender looked uncertain. Victoria, without thinking, or rather, thinking in the automatic way she always thought about these situations, turned to the bartender before he could respond and said clearly enough for the people around her to hear, "You really should not let them in off the street like this. It ruins the atmosphere for paying customers." She turned back to her drink. She did not look at the man. She said it the way she said everything in that register, not with visible malice, simply with the confidence of someone who considered the statement obvious. The bar was quiet for a moment. Nathan Cole set down his glass. He looked at the man at the bar and said to the bartender, "Please get him whatever he needs and put it on my tab." He said it without looking at Victoria. The bartender nodded and got the man a glass of water and a bowl of soup that had not been requested but was offered. Nathan watched until the man had been served. Then he looked at Victoria for a long moment without speaking. His expression was not angry. It was something more final than anger. It was the expression of a man who has just had a question he has been asking for 2 weeks answered completely. He excused himself shortly after. The evening ended. Victoria went home believing she had had a good day. She had not had a good day. Nathan Cole called James Whitfield at 7 the following morning. The call lasted 11 minutes. Whitfield did not speak for most of it. When Nathan finished, Whitfield said he understood and that he would handle it. Nathan said he trusted him to do that and that the acquisition timeline remained unchanged and that he would see Whitfield at the closing in 30 days. He hung up. Whitfield sat at his desk for a while. Then he called his HR director. Then he called his general counsel. Then he called Victoria Chase and asked her to come to his office at 9. Victoria arrived at 9 wearing the same quality of blazer she wore to every important meeting, carrying the same quality of leather portfolio, projecting the same quality of composed professional readiness. She sat across from Whitfield and his HR director and she listened for 6 minutes while Whitfield explained that the incoming ownership had conducted an evaluation of the senior leadership team during the previous week's visit and had communicated certain findings that the company was obligated to act on as a condition of the acquisition proceeding. He was careful. He was professional. He did not use Nathan's name. He did not describe the specific incident at the restaurant. He spoke in the language of corporate culture assessment and values alignment and leadership standards that the incoming ownership had established as non-negotiable for the senior team. Victoria understood before he finished the first sentence what was happening and spent the remaining 5 sentences trying to locate the version of events in which she could contest it. There was no such version. She had been assessed by the person who now owned the company she worked for. The assessment was complete. The outcome was not negotiable. Her termination was effective immediately. She was escorted to her office by the HR director to collect her personal items. Sandra Price was at her desk outside Victoria's office when Victoria emerged carrying a box. Sandra stood. She did not say anything dramatic. She did not allow herself the satisfaction of an expression that communicated what she knew. She simply said, "I hope you land somewhere good, Victoria." She meant it in the way that generous people mean things to people who have not been generous to them, not as absolution, simply as evidence of their own character. Victoria did not respond. She walked to the elevator. She pressed the button. She waited. The elevator came. She got in. The doors closed. The acquisition of Mercer and Lane by Cole Meridian Group was finalized 28 days later. It was covered in the Chicago Business Press and 2 national trade publications. The coverage included, for the first time, a photograph of Nathan Cole, taken at the closing dinner, a man in a charcoal wool suit with a notebook in his inside pocket and the expression of someone who had done exactly what he set out to do. Victoria Chase saw the photograph from her apartment in Lincoln Park where she had been for 4 weeks, fielding calls from recruiters who had heard she was available and trying to construct a narrative about her departure from Mercer and Lane that did not require her to examine what had actually happened. She looked at the photograph for a long time. She recognized the face before she read the name. She had seen that face before. She had walked past it on the steps of 420, North Michigan Avenue on a cold Wednesday morning in October and said something into her phone that she had not thought about again until this moment. The business press coverage noted that Nathan Cole was known for conducting what colleagues described as immersive cultural assessments before major acquisitions, a practice he had maintained across 30 years and 14 transactions. One former colleague, quoted anonymously, said that Nathan had told him once that you could read a balance sheet in an afternoon but you could not read a culture from inside it. You had to stand outside and watch who walked past and what they did when they thought nobody who mattered was watching. The article did not describe what Nathan had seen during his assessment of Mercer and Lane. It did not need to. Victoria Chase spent 7 months after her termination in a version of her life that she had never prepared for because she had always assumed that competence was sufficient protection against consequence. She learned, in those 7 months, that competence and character are not the same credential and that in certain rooms, the rooms that actually determine the direction of a career, character is the one being checked. She applied for 11 VP-level positions in that period. She received 4 interviews. She received no offers. Word travels in the ways that word travels in professional networks, not loudly, not through formal channels, but with the specific efficiency of people who talk to each other about people they are considering trusting with significant things. She did not know precisely what was being said or by whom. She knew the shape of the silence that greeted her applications and she understood what it meant. Her relationship with Drew Callahan ended in month 5. Drew had been attracted to the specific version of Victoria that was ascending and found the version that was standing still significantly less interesting. He did not say this directly. He said they had grown apart. He moved out on a Saturday in March with the efficiency of a man who had been thinking about moving out for longer than the conversation that prompted it. Victoria was alone in her Lincoln Park apartment that Saturday evening for the first time in 3 years and she sat in the specific silence of a life that has been constructed almost entirely of external validation and has suddenly had most of that validation removed and she thought, for the first time in a very long time, about what she actually believed about anything. The public moment came on a Tuesday morning in May 2024. Victoria had attended a professional networking event in the Loop, the kind she had been attending for months in the hope that proximity to people who were moving would eventually translate into movement of her own. Nathan Cole was the keynote speaker. She did not know this when she registered. She found out from the event program when she collected her badge at the registration desk and she considered leaving and decided that leaving was its own kind of statement and that she was not going to make it. She sat in the 3rd row. Nathan spoke for 40 minutes about the relationship between culture and value, about how the most expensive mistakes he had ever made in 30 years of acquisitions were not financial mistakes but cultural ones, about how a company's character was visible in the small moments that its leadership did not believe were being observed, about how he had learned to look for those moments deliberately because they were the only honest data available. He did not look at Victoria while he spoke. He did not reference her directly. He did not need to. Every person in that room who knew the story of the Mercer and Lane acquisition, and in that room, several people did, understood what he was describing and understood that he was describing it in a room that contained one of his examples. When the Q&A opened, Victoria raised her hand. Nathan acknowledged her without visible recognition, or rather, with the same quality of attention he brought to every person in every room, which was its own form of acknowledgement. She stood. She said her name. She said she had been VP of Brand and Communications at Mercer and Lane until last October. She said she had something she wanted to say publicly that she had not had the opportunity to say directly and she asked if he would allow her to say it. The room went quiet in the way that rooms go quiet when something real is about to happen in a space designed for the performance of professionalism. Nathan said, "Go ahead." Victoria Chase looked at Nathan Cole in front of 300 people and said that she had behaved in ways over the course of her career that she was not proud of. That she had organized her professional life around a hierarchy of who mattered that she had never examined and that the cost of not examining it had been paid by people who had deserved better from her. That she was not saying this to rehabilitate her reputation because she understood that was not how rehabilitation worked. She was saying it because it was true and because she had spent 7 months understanding why it was true and she thought the least she could do with that understanding was say it out loud in a room where it cost her something. The room was quiet for a moment. Nathan Cole looked at her from the podium. His expression was the expression of a man who has been watching people for 30 years and has just seen something he does not see very often. He said, "Thank you for saying that." And he moved to the next question. Victoria Chase left that event and walked out onto a May morning in Chicago that was nothing like the October morning 7 months earlier. She had no job. She had no relationship. She had a box of personal items from an office she had been escorted out of and a 7-month education in what it costs to build a life on the wrong foundation. She had said something true in front of 300 people and it had not fixed anything and she had not expected it to fix anything. She walked to her car. She sat in it for a moment. Then she started it and drove home through a city that was going about its Tuesday morning completely indifferent to what had just happened to her, which was, she understood, exactly what the city had always done, and exactly what she had always done to the people she had passed on her way through it. Nathan Cole had a rule. He had followed it for 30 years across 14 acquisitions and more human encounters than he could count. The rule was simple. How a person treats someone who cannot do anything for them is the only honest data point available about that person's character. Everything else is performance. He had learned this rule not from a book and not from a mentor and not from a business school case study. He had learned it on a winter morning in Waukegan when he was 23 years old, sitting outside a building in the cold, and a woman in an expensive coat had walked past him without slowing down, and he had watched her go and thought, "I will remember this." Not as a grievance. As a lesson. As the specific and irreversible understanding that the view from the outside of a building tells you everything the view from the inside will never show you. He built $4 billion on that understanding. He conducted 14 acquisitions using that methodology. He sat on the steps of 420 North Michigan Avenue for 4 days in October 2023 in a canvas jacket and a knit cap and watched 47 people walk past him. Most of them were decent. Several of them were generous. One of them dropped $1 from a height and said something into her phone that told him everything he needed to know about the gap between her professional performance and her actual character. He wrote 3 words in his notebook that morning. The words were not her name. The words were, "Already know enough." He turned the page. He kept watching. He was not done yet. He was never done until he understood the full picture. That was the rule. That was always the rule. And the rule had never been wrong. Now I want to hear from you. Because this story is not really about a billionaire and a VP and a restaurant and a networking event. It is about something much simpler and much more permanent than any of that. It is about the question of who you are when you believe nobody who matters is watching. So tell me in the comments, have you ever been in a position where someone treated you as though you were invisible? And did they ever find out who they were actually talking to? Drop your story below. And if you are not yet subscribed, do that right now, because the next story coming to this channel is about a man who spent 20 years building a secret that he believed was completely buried. One Tuesday morning, it walked back through his front door. That story is coming. Make sure you are here for it.